Ancient meteorites, strange time capsules, and creatures from a distant age, all found encapsulated in ice, frozen in time. Here are the top 15 strangest things found frozen in ice. Number 15. Meteorites. Our planet is constantly being bombarded with pieces of rock from space, and most places have equal chance of being struck as anywhere else. Luckily, the lumps that actually make it all the way to the surface are relatively small and rarely cause any damage, but they are incredibly useful to researchers to help understand what they're made from and where they've come from. Surprisingly, Antarctica is one of the best places on Earth to discover fallen meteorites. Not only are the dark rocks easier to see against the white snow and ice, but because of the geology of the continent, there are regions where they're found in greater concentrations than anywhere else on the planet. This is because the surface of Antarctica is constantly moving with the flow of glaciers, so the meteorites that have fallen over the centuries and become entombed within the ice are deposited in regions towards the end of these flows. And by focusing on these areas, scientists have been able to find hundreds of specimens. It's such a fruitful searching ground that NASA has a whole lab dedicated to the study of Antarctic meteorites. And it's possible that it's ones found there that will help unlock the origins of life and further understand the objects within our solar system. Number 14. Grasshopper Glacier. In the Beartooth Mountains of Montana, there's a small glacier that's been found to be one of the more unusual around the world. At just 1/5 of a mile long and 1/4 of a mile wide, it begins at an altitude of 11,000 feet and covers an area of 320 acres. It used to be much larger when it was first discovered. As it melted, researchers and locals found something strange emerging from the ice: millions of grasshoppers, which is why it's now known as the Grasshopper Glacier. Even more surprising was their age. Studies have found that they range between hundreds and thousands of years old, and some of them are species that have long been extinct. It's seen as proof that tens of millions of them once regularly swarmed across the plains of Montana, and on occasion would become caught up in the storms that formed over the mountains and would regularly be entombed within the ice. Up until the 1980s, it was quite common to find parts of the grasshoppers sticking out of the glacier, but in recent years it's become less common. This is believed to be as a result of climate change, which has meant that there's far less snowfall than in previous decades. So when the ice melts, the remains of the grasshoppers decompose and are scavenged by predators before people find them and preserve them for study. Quite how many are still in the ice isn't clear, but some estimates suggest there could be tens of millions hidden beneath the surface. Number 13. The Blood Falls. In Antarctica, the conditions are so cold that it's rare to see any natural flows of liquid water at all. But if you were to see a river or a waterfall, you'd probably expect it to be the clearest water you'll find anywhere on Earth. While this may be true in some places, there's a strange feature in the Taylor Valley of Victoria Land in eastern Antarctica that's long been a mystery, and it's known as the Blood Falls. First discovered in 1911 from the edge of the Taylor Glacier, there's a waterfall of salt water that has a remarkably deep red color. The first scientists to find and examine the waterfall have assumed that the coloration came from a type of red algae, but recent studies have found that it's actually because of the presence of high levels of iron oxide. The waterfall is fed from a lake beneath the glacier, which is present because of high levels of salt and the pressure that the glacier exudes upon it. This prevents the water from freezing, and as it flows through the bedrock to the opening, it accumulates the iron compounds that are released by microbial activity that's feeding upon the rock. By the time the water emerges, it's picked up enough to give it the crimson color to create one of the strangest and most unexpected sights anywhere in Antarctica. Number 12. H.M.S Terror. H.M.S Terror was originally built in 1813 for the British Royal Navy as a state-of-the-art warship and was used in the War of 1812 between Britain and the United States. Within 20 years, however, there were far more effective ships that had been brought into service, so the Terror was refitted for polar exploration. The ship was a part of the Ross expedition between 1839 and 1843, but met its end along with the H.M.S Erebus in 1845. During this trip, the crew had been trying to make the first full crossing of the Northwest Passage, and at the same time gather magnetic data of the region. Things went terribly wrong, however, and both ships became stuck within the ice and eventually sank, while the crew were forced to try and fend for themselves after abandoning ship, and all of them ultimately died. It would be another 170 years until the wreck of the H.M.S Terror would be found near King William Island in Terror Bay at a depth of around 75 feet. The discovery was a result of a concerted effort by Parks Canada that organized a research vessel to break through the ice in search of the lost ships. Both the Terror and the Erebus were found, and because they had spent so long stuck in ice and freezing water, they were in remarkable condition. Further explorations of the secret location of the ship are planned over the next few years, and it's hoped that the written journals of the ship's captain, along with objects from the time, will have been preserved too, and will eventually be retrieved as important historical artifacts. Number 11. P-38 Lightning Fighter Aircraft. In 1942, the Second World War was still raging across Europe and the rest of the world, and Allied forces were being spread thin with fighting happening on so many different fronts. The U.S. Air Force had sent a squadron of 6 P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft and 2 B-17 Fortress bombers to help the British RAF in patrolling the skies, but on July 15th found themselves in a powerful blizzard that forced them to conduct an emergency landing on a glacier in Greenland. 9 days later, the crew were all rescued, but by that time there was nothing that could be done to salvage the planes, and they were left to the mercy of the ice sheets. The continually moving ice eventually consumed the remains of the aircraft and covered them with between 250 and 300 feet of ice. The story of the lost squadron was never forgotten, however, and in 1992 a team of researchers managed to locate and retrieve one of the P-38s. The location of the rest remained a mystery though, but in 2011 a group returned with a ground-penetrating radar mounted on drones and managed to locate another of the planes. At first they weren't sure and drilled down to it with a hot water probe, but when it was pulled back up, it was found to be covered in red hydraulic fluid. There's no doubt that it was one of the fighters. The plan is to finally recover the plane and to find the remaining 6 to retrieve them from the ice too, as despite being covered with so much ice, they remain in remarkably good condition and are a wonderful piece of history. Number 10. Frozen Fox. There are plenty of stories of humans who, for one reason or another, have succumbed to frozen waters, snow, and ice, but we're not the only ones who misjudge our actions in hospitable climates. Animals can be just as unfortunate, and in early January of 2017, a German hunter made an unexpected discovery. He had been walking alongside the frozen Danube River in the southwest of the country when he noticed an unusual orange color beneath the surface. He went to investigate further and found that it was a fox. It's not unusual to see animals braving the walk across the ice in search of food, and at points it's incredibly thin and will break with just a small amount of pressure. It seems as if this fox made one fatal mistake and found itself plunged into the water with no way to escape and was slowly frozen where it fell. The hunter took things a step further though, and instead of leaving the fox where it was, he returned with a chainsaw and cut out the frozen creature along with the ice around it from the river and placed it in front of his family's hotel. And while it became somewhat of a tourist attraction for a few days before it thawed out, the hunter said the main reason he put it there was to serve as a warning to others of how dangerous the ice can be and how easily any creature can find themselves in an inescapable situation. Number 9. Hidden Treasure. In 2013, a French mountain climber found a remarkable discovery in the thawing snow of Mont Blanc, and when he walked into the local police station to report what he had found, no one could believe their eyes. In his hand was a metal case with the inscription, "Made in India," and inside were sapphires, emeralds, and rubies that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You might think that this find would be completely unexpected, and virtually anywhere else in the world it certainly would have been. But locals familiar with the mountain are very aware of Indian relics that periodically appear in the region, and each time they bring back memories of a terrible accident that happened in 1966. That was the year that Air India's Boeing 707 flight to New York via Geneva and London crashed into the mountain, supposedly as a result of faulty instruments that made the pilots miscalculate their altitude and crash into the mountain's peak. There were no survivors, and debris was scattered all around and quickly covered with snow. Every now and then the snow will melt or move and reveal another artifact from the flight, but this one has been by far the most valuable. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Box of Photos. At the beginning of the 20th century, a number of different expeditions went to Antarctica with various goals in mind. Some wanted to reach the South Pole, while others wanted to chart the continent to claim land for their home countries. But no matter why they had gone there, they all needed shelter and refuge to protect themselves against the harsh environment. It's for this reason that a number of exploration huts were built and still remain there to this day. Of course, they're primitive compared to today's standards and aren't used by explorers anymore. And in 2014, a team from the New Zealand Antarctic Heritage Trust embarked on a mission to restore some of the huts as historical monuments. While they were doing this to one of Captain Scott's huts, they found a block of ice which had contained within it a box of 22 cellulose nitrate negatives that had been taken by explorers on the continent. After meticulous restoration and processing, the images were finally retrieved from the negatives, and are now a remarkable insight into what it was like to explore the frozen continent more than a century ago. Thought to have been taken during Ernest Shackleton's Ross Sea Party expedition between 1914 and 1917, the trip itself ended in disaster with the loss of a boat and 3 members of the crew, but the images have proven to be an invaluable record of what the ice sheets looked like back then, and can be compared to how different they are today. Number 7. Fossilized Rainforest. We think of Antarctica as being a continent that's covered in snow and ice, and hasn't got any vegetation at all. While this has been true for millions of years at least, it wasn't always the way. The continent was once covered in a lush, fertile forest, with plant and animal life like elsewhere on Earth, and in 2017 researchers found direct evidence that this was truly the case. They had been looking beneath the ice at a region that they believed dated back to around 280 million years ago, at a time when Antarctica was covered in trees of a particular species that grew up to 130 feet tall. To support their growth, they developed vast root networks, and because they eventually died due to the eruption of volcanoes, they were covered in burning hot ash and remarkably preserved in rock. It's these fossilized remains that researchers have begun to uncover, and are now of particular interest to scientists. These trees had to endure changing atmospheric conditions, and it's by studying them that it's hoped that predictions can be made of how plant life will react to the current changes in climate that are being caused by human activity. Number 6. First aircraft in Antarctica. The Wright brothers made history in 1903 by flying the first successful airplane, and it's amazing to think just how quickly the technology spread and was being reproduced. Just 11 years later, Douglas Mawson, an Australian explorer, had taken a Vickers aircraft to Antarctica and was the first person to take one of the vehicles to the frozen continent. He converted the plane to use as an air tractor to help transport supplies over an ice sheet, but its engine seized up. There was no way to fix it, and so it was abandoned, and over the subsequent years it was covered with snow and ice. As such an important part of exploration history, the recovery of the plane had long been an ultimate aim of historians, but because of the way that ice moves, they had no idea where the wreckage was. It was finally rediscovered in 2010 after 3 years of searching, when it was found almost by accident by an engineer who was taking a walk near to the camp. It was a combination of an extremely low tide, an unusual amount of melted ice, and a blue moon that cast the landscape in a different light that caused the metal of the plane to glimmer, and the team were able to retrieve the fuselage. They had been expected to need to dig deep into the ice to get it, so its location near the surface was a complete surprise, and when they were left to make the decision of whether it was best left where it was, or whether attempts should be made to take it back to the mainland. Number 5. Dinosaur Fossils. As Antarctica hasn't always been a frozen wilderness and was once covered in thick forests and vegetation, it was also home to a number of species of dinosaur, and the ground can be just as much of a wealth of fossils as anywhere else in the world, although of course they can be more difficult to access because of the freezing temperatures. In May of 2016, researchers announced an incredible discovery. They had found more than a ton of prehistoric fossils that dated back to between 67 and 71 million years ago. They were found beneath the melted ice on Ross Island, which is between Chile and Antarctica, and were from a variety of species of reptiles and birds, although a large proportion were from mosasaurs. What was particularly interesting about this find was that the remains were from a time very close to the mass extinction that wiped out most life on the planet, and it's possible that by studying them, further clues can be found about exactly why they all died out and the environmental changes they had to endure before becoming extinct. The find was so substantial that further trips to the island are planned to see what else is there, and researchers also hope to plan trips to the coastal regions of Antarctica itself, because it's likely to be a source of countless never-before-seen species buried beneath the ice. Number 4. Iron Age Horse. Ice around the world is melting at a much greater rate than ever, and while it's a worrying sign of how the climate's changing, it also presents opportunities for archaeologists like never before. Ancient objects that had long been frozen in time are now slowly being revealed and offer the chance to learn far more about how the world once was. This is exactly what happened in 2013 in Norway, where experts believe that all the ice in the high mountain regions will be gone by the end of this century. During an expedition to measure the rate of melting, one research team spotted something emerging from the surface, and after investigation realized that it was remains of a horse from the Iron Age. What was particularly surprising was the altitude this discovery was made at more than 6,500 feet above sea level. It's the first time an animal like this has been found so high up, and is proof that people during the Iron Age were using horses to transport through the region. It's most likely the horses were carrying reindeer carcasses from the mountains to the lower down villages, as this would have been one of the best sources of meat and fur that was available to them. It had previously been thought that the people only regularly passed through the area many thousands of years later, and is a great example of how a find like this can completely rewrite what we thought we knew about ancient communities. Number 3. The Wilkes Land Gravity Anomaly. When large meteors strike the Earth, they create huge impact craters that can, in many cases, be detectable for a long time after it happens. In Antarctica, however, the constant buildup of snow and ice means that the scars that lie beneath are obstructed from view. And it's only recently, with the advent of new technologies, that researchers are able to see beneath the surface and uncover what's hidden below. One of the most mysterious regions is deep under the ice cap of Wilkes Land in East Antarctica, where a gravitational anomaly has been detected. Regions like this are found across the planet and are usually associated with impact craters. So could this have meant that it's the site of a historic meteor strike that could have potentially affected the entire world? Researchers increasingly believe so, and think that it's evidence of one of the largest impacts ever. Estimates of the size of the crater based on the gravitational anomaly and scans suggest that it's up to 300 miles wide, which would make it 2.5 times larger than the crater at Chicxulub, which is thought to be the one that was responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs. Further studies show that it's less than 500 million years old, but more than 100 million years old, and the leading theory is that the impact took place 250 million years ago, and was responsible for the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which was the largest extinction event known to have taken place since life developed on the planet. Number 2. Anthrax-infected reindeer. There have long been fictional stories of diseases discovered beneath the ice that have gone on to infect people. But while you may think these are simply crazy plots for horror films, they're far closer to the truth than most people realize. As the ice and permafrost around the world is melting, objects from history are being revealed, and some of them contain dangerous substances that have led to a number of deaths, and most likely will do again. In 2016, in the Yamalo-Nenets region of Siberia in Russia, a heat wave saw ice levels reduced to their lowest in decades. This led to an outbreak of anthrax, which infected 8 people and killed more than 2,300 reindeer. And for a while, authorities were at a loss to explain how it happened. It's now generally believed that an infected reindeer carcass had been exposed from beneath the ice, and that a passing herd picked it up and spread it across the region. Luckily, anthrax is something that we know how to treat, so all of those that were infected went on to make a full recovery. The fear is, however, that as remains from much longer ago are exposed, the virus may very well return that we currently have no way of treating. Number 1. Bottles of whiskey. In 2010, conservationists were attempting to renovate a hut in Cape Royds, Antarctica, that had been used by Ernest Shackleton on several trips to the frozen continent. But when they took a look beneath the structure's floorboards, they found one thing that anyone in such a frozen environment would want: several crates of whiskey. The crates were frozen solid after having been there for more than a century, but even at sub-zero temperatures, the alcohol itself hadn't frozen, and they could hear it sloshing around inside. Amazingly, the team that found them resisted the temptation to try the Mackinlay whiskey, which had been bottled in Scotland in 1898, and instead it was taken back with them to New Zealand. Upon hearing about the find, the company that now owns the Mackinlay brand chartered a private jet from New Zealand to take the bottles back to Scotland so they could recreate the whiskey. The recipe had long been lost, but by removing some by a syringe through the cork, they were able to create a limited edition batch of 50,000 bottles that were sold to raise funds for the Antarctic Conservation Mission. As for what remained of the original bottles, they were taken back to the hut where they were found, to remain as a memorial to the golden age of Antarctic explorations. Watch our nature playlist for more top 15 videos about beautiful nature. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best nature videos.